December 17th, a Wednesday that smelled faintly of coffee and cinnamon candles. The kind of cold that makes the windows hum and the floor creak under tired feet. I was halfway through folding laundry when my phone buzzed twice on the counter. The sound echoed strangely in the quiet kitchen. I wiped my hands on a towel, still warm from the dryer, and picked it up expecting a reminder from the pharmacy or a message from church. Instead, it was my daughter. "Don't come for Christmas," the text read. Just that. No emojis, no explanation. A moment later, another message slid in from my son, "We'll pretend we don't know you." I remember staring at the screen, waiting for more, waiting for something that would make it a joke. My heart didn't race, it just dropped low and quiet, the way a stone does when it hits deep water. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. Outside, the first few flakes of snow brushed against the window like someone whispering, "You should have seen this coming." For a long moment, I didn't move. My hands, still a little damp from the laundry, left faint prints on the countertop. I wanted to type back something sharp, something that would hurt as much as they'd just hurt me. Instead, I set the phone down next to the coffee mug and looked around the kitchen. Every cabinet, every chair, every picture on the wall had been part of their childhood. I could see my son at 12, throwing his backpack on the counter, my daughter at 8, twirling in her father's old flannel shirt like it was a princess gown. Now both of them had written me out of their holiday like I was a character that didn't test well with audiences. The candle on the table had burned down to a ring of melted wax, and the scent of cinnamon had turned bitter. I blew it out and walked slowly to the living room. The boxes of Christmas decorations were already waiting near the fireplace. I'd brought them down from the attic last week, the same as I always did, telling myself this year would be better. The lid of the first box creaked when I opened it. Inside lay the wooden ornaments my husband had carved, little reindeer, stars, an angel with wings too big for its body. He'd made them the year we couldn't afford store-bought ones, when I was pregnant with our daughter and the heater broke halfway through December. I picked up the angel and turned it over in my hand. The paint was chipped on one side, the wood smooth where my fingers had polished it over the years. For a second I could hear his voice again, that soft Midwestern calm that never left him even when times were hard. "Christmas isn't about who shows up, Eve," he'd say. "It's about who still believes when no one else does." The memory hit like a breath of cold air. I sat down on the edge of the couch, ornament clutched tight, and felt the tears start to rise. Not the loud kind, not the movie kind. The quiet kind that roll down slow and sting because you're ashamed of them. I'd raised those kids on double shifts and leftover casseroles. I'd put both of them through college. I'd co-signed my daughter's first mortgage and paid my son's credit card when he got laid off. And now, because her fiancé's family wanted a picture-perfect Christmas, I wasn't a good fit. I walked to the fireplace and set the angel back on the mantel. The house felt too big, like every room had grown since morning. I needed something to do, so I started packing the decorations back into the box, one by one. Each ornament clicked softly against the next, like a metronome for grief. When I reached the bottom of the box, I saw it, the old manila folder labeled, "Property Deed, 2003. The edges were soft from years of handling. My husband's handwriting slanted across the corner, steady and confident. That folder had followed us from our first apartment to this house, through every refinance, every tax season. I'd meant to put it back in the safe months ago, but somehow it stayed here, under the tinsel. I sat at the table again and opened it. The paper smelled faintly of dust and ink. There was his signature, blue and faded but still strong. My own name printed beside it. I ran my thumb along the edge of the page. This house, this roof, these walls, had been built with our sweat, our patience, our faith that family was something you could build too. I thought about my daughter calling it our dream home in those glossy photos she posted online. About how her friends commented, "Goals," and "You two worked so hard." She never corrected them. I had laughed about it once, proud that she wanted to take care of the place after I was gone. Now, seeing that signature, I realized she hadn't wanted to take care of it. She wanted to erase who'd built it. The furnace kicked on with a groan, the same sound it had made for 20 years. I pulled my cardigan tight and closed the folder, but I couldn't put it away. Something about it felt heavier than before, like it carried more than ownership, like it carried proof. Proof of work, proof of truth, proof that I wasn't invisible. I carried the folder to the mantel and set it next to the angel. The glow from the fireplace flickered across the glass frame of our family photo, the four of us smiling in front of this same tree 10 Christmases ago. Back then, the kids still believed in magic. Back then, I still believed they always would. The clock struck 8. I should have eaten dinner, but the thought of cooking for one made my stomach turn. I poured a glass of water, sat by the window, and watched the snow fall in the yellow streetlight. Each flake landed softly, soundless, layering over the sidewalk like an apology no one would ever say out loud. I tried to replay the messages in my mind, to find a reason. Maybe they thought I'd embarrassed them. Maybe I talked too much about their father. Maybe they were just tired of being reminded that money doesn't buy class. Whatever the reason, the silence between us stretched until it felt like a wall. I opened my phone again, read the texts one more time. My finger hovered over the keyboard, but I couldn't bring myself to reply. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound small. Instead, I opened the photo gallery and scrolled back through years of images, birthdays, graduations, weddings, the old family truck in the background of every picture like a loyal dog. And there, buried between snapshots, was one I hadn't seen in years, my husband standing on the porch holding the deed folder, his hand raised like he'd just won something. I stared at that photo for a long time. Then I turned the screen off, set the phone face down, and breathed out slow. Maybe this was how people lose each other, not in one explosion, but in 100 small silences that nobody notices until it's too late. The clock ticked louder. Somewhere outside, a neighbor's wind chime clinked softly. I felt a strange calm settle in, not peace exactly, but the kind of steadiness that comes after shock. I walked back to the mantel, adjusted the folder so the words property deed were easy to read even in the dim light. My reflection hovered over the glass of the family photo, older, lonelier, but unbroken. Snow kept falling. The room smelled faintly of smoke and cinnamon and something sharper, resolve, maybe. I turned off the lamp, leaving only the firelight. For a long while I just stood there, watching the flames move behind the screen, watching the shadows stretch across the floor. Then I whispered, so softly even I could barely hear it, "Merry Christmas." It wasn't bitterness in my voice, just finality. I climbed the stairs, every step creaking like the house was listening. Behind me, the folder caught the light once more, the gold edge of the paper glowing warm against the dark. A small thing, but enough. Something had shifted. I didn't know what I would do yet, but I knew one thing for certain, this story wasn't over, and when it was, they'd remember exactly whose name was on that deed. The morning after the texts, I woke up before sunrise. The house was still and gray, the kind of silence that makes you notice every drip from the faucet and every groan of the old pipes. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee, staring out at the frost on the window. The world looked frozen in place. A squirrel's paw prints led across the porch rail, ending at the empty bird feeder. I thought about filling it, then didn't. The only sound came from the heater kicking in with a tired sigh. For the first time in years, I didn't have a single plan for Christmas. No grocery list, no extra chairs, no smell of pie cooling on the counter. Just a week's worth of quiet stretching ahead of me. I poured the rest of the coffee down the sink and decided to keep busy. Cleaning was safer than thinking. By mid-morning, I was sweeping the front steps when my neighbor, Lorna, waved from her driveway. She was bundled in that same red parka she'd worn every winter since I'd moved here. "You not getting ready for the big party, Eve?" she called, brushing snow off her car. "Not this year," I said. She frowned. "Kids running the show now, huh?" "Something like that." She hesitated, reading my face the way only someone who's known your secrets for decades can. "You need anything, holler. I've got that extra ham in the freezer." I thanked her, forcing a small smile. When she drove off, I stood for a long time watching the exhaust drift into the air until it vanished. It reminded me of how fast warmth disappears when there's no one left to share it with. Inside, the house smelled faintly of pine and dust. The boxes of decorations still sat by the fireplace, unopened now. I tried turning on the TV, hoping for noise, but every channel was filled with cheerful jingles and perfect families in sweaters. I turned it off again. My own reflection in the black screen looked like someone else's, smaller, older. I walked to the hallway and opened the drawer of the old secretary desk. Inside were letters, bills, and a small stack of photos tied with ribbon. One by one, I untied them. There was my daughter at 12, missing her front tooth, holding a snow globe. My son at 10, face red from sledding, grinning at the camera. And there was one of all of us in front of the house, back when it still had peeling paint and hope. My husband's arm was around me, his other hand held that same manila folder I'd looked at last night. He was proud that day. We'd just finished paying off the last of the mortgage. I could still hear him laughing, saying, "Nobody can take this from us now." The thought made me stop breathing for a moment. Because, in a way, someone had. I turned on the old computer sitting on the desk. It wheezed and blinked awake, and I opened my email archives. I typed my husband's name into the search bar and scrolled through the old documents. There were scanned receipts, payment confirmations, letters from the bank congratulating us for clearing the loan. All of it proof, clear as daylight, that every brick in this house had been bought with his labor and my long nights at the diner. I sat back and looked at the screen. Proof wasn't what I needed right now. What I wanted was to understand why they'd done it. How do children reach a point where they'd rather erase their parents than include them? My phone buzzed on the table. For a second, my heart jumped. Maybe it was them, maybe an apology, but it was just a group message from the neighborhood board about snow shoveling schedules. I scrolled through Facebook instead, mindlessly, until her face appeared on my feed. My daughter, smiling bright, captioning a photo, "Love this house we built together. Hard work pays off." The comments were endless. "You guys are such a power couple. Goals. So proud of you both. Built together. Hard work." I read it again and again until the words blurred. Not one mention of her father. Not one mention of me. A mix of sadness and something sharper twisted in my chest. I clicked through her photos. There were shots of the same kitchen where I was sitting, except now everything looked magazine perfect, white counters, gold trim, new chairs I didn't recognize. I zoomed in on one picture. My husband's old clock still hung above the doorway, but she'd painted over the wood frame he built by hand. I closed the page. My hands were shaking. I didn't cry this time. I just sat still, letting the heat from the radiator dry the air until my throat felt raw. In the afternoon, I decided to walk into town. The snow had stopped, leaving a pale blue sky and the smell of smoke from distant chimneys. The sidewalks were slick, and the light had that low golden color that comes before early winter sunsets. I passed the bakery, the post office, and finally the small county clerk's office on Main Street. The glass door jingled when I pushed it open. A young clerk behind the counter looked up. "Can I help you?" "Yes," I said softly. "I'd like a certified copy of a property deed. 128 Maple Avenue. Evelyn Brooks." She nodded, typing quickly. "Do you have ID?" I handed her my driver's license. The computer made a small whirring sound. "Looks like we can print that right now," she said. "That'll be $8. I paid, watching the printer spit out the document. She stapled the county seal to the top and slid it across the counter. The paper was warm from the machine. "Thank you," I said, folding it carefully into my purse. Walking home, I felt lighter, like the cold didn't bite quite as hard. It wasn't revenge that warmed me, it was proof of truth, simple and solid. When I got home, I made a cup of tea and sat by the window. Across the street, kids were building a snowman, their laughter carrying through the air. I thought about my own children at that age, when every snowstorm was a miracle and I was still the center of their world. The ache in my chest was duller now, replaced by something steadier, a quiet clarity. That night, I pulled the deed out of my purse and set it on the kitchen table. The county seal shimmered under the lamplight. I took out the old Bible from the shelf, opened it to the page where my husband had pressed a note years ago. The paper had yellowed, but his handwriting was still bold. Everything we build for love. Never let anyone tell you otherwise. I read the line over and over until it felt like a heartbeat. For a moment, I almost laughed. My husband had always been patient, always believed that the truth didn't need defending, it just needed to wait for the right time to be seen. Maybe he'd been right. I opened my laptop again and clicked to start a new post on Facebook. My fingers hovered over the keys, the glow from the screen lighting the room in soft blue. I typed, "Some families forget who paid for the house they now decorate." Then I stopped. I erased it. The sentence was too sharp, too bitter. I didn't want to hurt them. I wanted them to understand. I closed the laptop and instead took out a single Christmas card from the drawer. It had a snow-covered farmhouse on the front. Inside, I wrote only 2 words, "For later." I tucked the deed inside the card, sealed it, and placed it on the mantel beside the angel ornament. Outside, the wind was picking up again. The bare branches scraped against the window, and the house made that long, settling groan it always did when the temperature dropped. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and turned on the small radio. Frank Sinatra was singing, "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas." I leaned back in the chair, the warmth of the tea seeping into my palms. For the first time in days, my breathing slowed. I wasn't planning anything yet. I was just watching, waiting, listening. Somewhere deep down, a seed of something began to grow, not anger, not revenge, but a need for truth to stand on its own feet again. Before bed, I walked through each room, turning off lights, touching the walls like they were old friends. In the hallway mirror, my reflection looked steadier, almost determined. I whispered goodnight to the house and left the card on the mantel where the firelight could touch it. As I climbed the stairs, I thought of the deed, of my husband's note, of those photos online. The world had changed around me, but paper and ink still meant something. So did honesty. When I reached the top step, I turned back once more. The envelope gleamed faintly in the firelight. I didn't know what it would mean yet, or when I'd use it, but I knew it mattered. That little seed in my chest felt alive now, quietly waiting for its season to bloom. 3 days passed without a single call. The quiet felt heavier now, not like peace but like the thick stillness before a storm. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart leapt a little, then sank when it was only a delivery promotion or a weather alert. I stopped checking after a while. Instead, I began watching the rhythm of the neighborhood. The same mailman passing at 9 sharp, Lorna scraping ice off her windshield, the high school kids trudging by in their oversized coats. Everyone looked busy, anchored, part of something. I felt like a ghost wandering my own life. That morning, I took the deed from the mantel and slipped it into my handbag. I didn't know why exactly, but I felt safer having it close. Maybe it was a reminder that the truth had weight, that I still existed on paper even if my own children had chosen to forget. I locked the front door and started walking toward town. The air smelled of chimney smoke and wet pine. The sidewalks were half frozen, salt crunching under my boots. On Main Street, Christmas lights twinkled between the lampposts. Each shop window displayed the same perfect scene: cozy sweaters, golden ribbons, families smiling around turkeys. It made my stomach twist, seeing so many versions of happiness while mine sat on a shelf collecting dust. I ducked into the cafe on the corner. The bell above the door jingled, and the warm scent of roasted coffee hit me like a wave. Behind the counter stood Tom, the owner, polishing cups the way he always did when business was slow. He'd known me since before the kids were born. "Well, if it isn't Miss Evelyn," he said, eyes crinkling. "Haven't seen you in ages." I managed a smile. "Just needed a warm place to sit," He poured a mug of black coffee without asking. Your usual. I took it to the booth by the window, the one where my husband and I used to sit on Sundays after church. For a while I just watched the street outside, the people hurrying past with shopping bags. Tom came over, wiping his hands on a towel. How's the family? Getting ready for the big day? I hesitated. They're busy this year. He nodded slowly, reading the rest between the lines. Kids these days forget who held the ladder for them to climb. That sentence stayed with me long after I left. Forget who held the ladder. On the walk home, snow began to fall again, soft and steady. Each flake seemed to whisper something, not cruel but firm, like the world itself reminding me of balance. I realized I didn't want to hurt them. I didn't even want revenge. What I wanted was for the truth to breathe again, to stand in the open where no lie could live beside it. That evening, I sat down at the dining table with a notepad. I began listing what I had. The deed. Copies of every payment. Photos of the house over the years. Screenshots of my daughter's posts claiming it as her own. Next to that list, I wrote another. What I wanted, acknowledgement, not apology. What they needed, reminder, not punishment. I didn't realize it yet, but that list was the start of a plan. The next morning, I went back to the cafe. Tom was already there, brewing another pot. Back for round 2? He asked. I need a favor, I said quietly. Do you remember helping paint our porch back in 2003? He smiled. Course I do. Your husband bribed me with chili and beer. Would you mind writing that down? Just a note, saying you remember when the house was finished and who owned it then. He gave me a curious look but didn't ask questions. Sure, Evie. He tore a page from his order pad and scribbled a few lines. I, Thomas Keller, helped Michael and Evelyn Brooks repaint their house at 128 Maple after final payment in 2003. He signed and dated it. When he handed it to me, our fingers brushed, and he said softly, You okay? I nodded. Just remembering who held the ladder. That evening, I spread everything on the kitchen table, the deed, Tom's note, the old receipts, the printouts. Each piece of paper looked small by itself, but together they told a story no one could twist. The lamplight glowed gold on the pages. I imagined my husband sitting across from me, nodding that quiet nod he used to give when something finally made sense. Around 9, I opened my laptop again. My daughter had posted another photo, a Christmas tree glowing in the front window of the house. My house. Her caption read, So proud to host my first real Christmas in our forever home. I stared at it until my eyes blurred. Something inside me steadied, like a pendulum finding its rhythm. I opened the folder of proof and took a picture of the deed with my phone. The flash reflected off the seal, bright and sharp. Then I created a new post. Some families forget who paid for the house they now decorate. I attached the image and set the privacy to friends of friends, not public, but enough. My finger hovered over the post button. I hesitated. This wasn't just a click, it was a doorway. Once I crossed it, the truth would no longer belong only to me. The radio on the counter played softly, Nat King Cole singing about a merry little Christmas. I thought about all the times I'd chosen silence for peace, how many small humiliations I'd swallowed just to keep the family together. Then I thought about my husband's words, never let them rewrite our story. I pressed post. The notification pinged instantly. One like, then another. Comments started appearing from old friends, church folks, neighbors. Beautiful message. You always had the biggest heart, Evelyn. Then a few that made my stomach tighten. Wait, isn't that your daughter's house? I closed the laptop and walked to the window. The snow outside had turned heavy, swirling under the streetlights. For a while I just stood there, listening to the faint hum of wind against the glass. I didn't feel guilty. I felt calm, almost solemn, like someone lighting a candle in a dark room. The next day, whispers started. Lorna called mid-morning. Honey, your Facebook post, people are talking. I figured they might, I said. Well, you didn't lie, she added carefully. Sometimes truth just shows up where it's been missing. By noon, my phone buzzed non-stop, notifications, messages, tags. I didn't open them. Instead, I made soup and watched the snow pile higher outside. Every so often, I'd catch my reflection in the window, steady eyes, calm mouth. It wasn't vengeance I saw there. It was restoration. Late that afternoon, my son texted, Mom, what did you do? I read it twice, then set the phone down. He deserved a reply, but not yet. They both needed time to sit with what they'd buried. As night fell, I lit the fireplace and poured myself a small glass of wine. The light flickered over the deed on the table. I thought about deleting the post, but part of me knew it was too late for that. Truth, once spoken, doesn't crawl back into silence. Around 10, a new message came, not from my kids, but from an unfamiliar name. Hi, Mrs. Brooks. I saw your post. I never knew that was your house. Your husband built our back deck years ago. He was a good man. I read it 3 times before answering. Thank you. He was. After that, I shut down the laptop. The house creaked softly around me, settling. The wind outside had died down. For the first time in days, I felt tired in a good way, the kind of tired that comes after you finally stop pretending. Before bed, I looked again at the mantel. The angel ornament caught the light, the little wooden wings glowing. Beside it, the envelope I'd labeled for later waited patiently. I touched it gently, then left it there. As I turned off the lights, I thought of my children at that party they were so proud of, standing in the very rooms built from the sweat of people they'd chosen to forget. Somewhere, maybe, a phone would buzz with a new notification. Maybe someone would ask my daughter a question she couldn't quite answer. I didn't need to see it happen. I just knew that it would. The truth had finally left my house and started walking on its own 2 feet. And whatever came next, I was ready for it. Christmas Eve arrived like an old wound reopening. The morning light was sharp and colorless, cutting through the frost on the window panes. I woke to the faint sound of carolers outside, their voices cheerful and distant, as if coming from a world that had forgotten me. I sat up slowly, feeling the stiffness in my knees, and reached for the robe draped over the chair. On the nightstand, my phone blinked with new messages, 30 of them. I didn't open a single one. I brewed coffee instead, the smell filling the house with warmth that didn't quite reach my chest. When I sat down at the kitchen table, I saw the reflection of the Christmas tree lights in the window across the street, my daughter's house. Cars lined her driveway. Guests were already arriving, dressed for photographs, laughter spilling into the cold air as they carried wrapped gifts and bottles of wine. From where I sat, I could almost hear the crunch of their boots on the snow. I imagined her greeting them, wearing one of those sequin sweaters she loved. Maybe her fiancé's parents were there, the ones she was so desperate to impress. I pictured her smiling, pretending everything was perfect, pretending she'd built that life all by herself. I wondered if she'd seen my post yet. My heart told me she had. My gut told me she was pretending she hadn't. The clock struck 10. I turned on the old record player in the corner. Nat King Cole's voice rose softly, filling the empty house. The crackle of the vinyl made it sound almost alive, like the ghost of every Christmas that came before. I poured myself a second cup of coffee and sat quietly, watching the snow drift sideways outside. By noon, the messages on my phone had doubled. Friends. Neighbors. Even old coworkers. Some wrote kind words, others asked questions they already knew the answer to. Is it true? That house is yours? I always wondered why she never mentioned you. I didn't answer any of them. Truth, I'd decided, didn't need my commentary. It had found its own voice now. Around 3, I bundled up and stepped outside. The air was sharp enough to bite. I walked to the end of the driveway and looked toward her house again. Through the big bay window, I could see the party in full swing. Lights twinkled. Music pulsed faintly. People were clinking glasses. For a brief moment, it almost looked beautiful, until I noticed her standing by the tree, phone in hand, her smile fading as she read something on the screen. Someone inside leaned over her shoulder. Then another. Faces began to shift from laughter to confusion, then to something heavier, discomfort. She turned away from them quickly, retreating toward the hallway, her fiancé following with a furrowed brow. I didn't need to hear the words to know what was happening. Someone had shown her my post. Maybe one of her friends, maybe one of his family members. The timing was perfect, fate had better aim than I ever could. I went back inside, unwrapped my scarf, and stood near the fireplace. The flames whispered softly, the only sound in the room. I set another log on the grate and watched the sparks rise. My hands trembled a little, not from guilt but from the strange mix of sadness and satisfaction twisting inside me. At 5, Lorna called. "Evelyn, honey, have you looked online?" "No," I said. "Well, it's everywhere now. Your post's been shared about 2,000 times. People are commenting, saying how strong you are. Some of them even saying your daughter should apologize." I leaned against the mantel, closing my eyes. Let them say what they need to. "You did nothing wrong," Lorna said firmly. "You just told the truth." After she hung up, I stood there for a long moment, letting the words settle. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt steady, like the ground had stopped shifting beneath me. Outside, the snow thickened, blanketing the world in silence. I made dinner for one, a bowl of soup, a piece of cornbread, and ate it by the window. Across the street, I saw fewer lights now. Cars had started to leave. I wondered if the party had ended early. At 7, the doorbell rang. The sound echoed through the house, sharp and sudden. My breath caught. For a second, I thought about not answering. But then I walked slowly to the door and looked through the peephole. It was my son. He stood there, coat unbuttoned, hair damp from the snow. His face was pale, his jaw tight. I opened the door just enough to let the cold air in. "Mom," he said quietly. "Can we talk?" I didn't move. "I think you already said what you needed to." He winced. "Please. Just for a minute." Reluctantly, I stepped aside. He brushed past me, the smell of cologne and regret trailing behind. He took off his gloves, rubbing his hands together. "It's chaos over there," he said. "Everyone's talking about your post. Dad's name, the deed, everything. You embarrassed her, Mom." I raised an eyebrow. Embarrassed her? By existing? He looked away. "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" He didn't answer. The silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Finally, he said, "You could have called. We could have handled this privately." "You told me not to come for Christmas," I said softly. "You told me you'd pretend you didn't know me. So I didn't call. I respected your wishes." His mouth opened, then closed again. The anger drained from his face, replaced by something like shame. He glanced at the mantle, at the envelope and the angel ornament. "You kept everything," he murmured. "Of course I did. It's my life." He sat down, elbows on his knees. "She's in bad shape, Mom. Her fiancé's parents left early. Said they don't like liars. She's crying, saying you ruined her." I felt my throat tighten. "No, son. I didn't ruin her. I just stopped covering for her." He didn't respond. The fire popped, and the sound made both of us flinch. After a long moment, he whispered, "She wants to call you, but she's scared you won't pick up." "I won't tonight," I said. "She needs to sit with it. She needs to remember where she came from." He nodded slowly, rubbing his hands again. You're colder than I remember. No, I said, just tired of pretending warmth fixes everything. He stood, pulling his gloves back on. She'll reach out soon. I'll be here, I said. Same place I've always been. When the door closed behind him, the silence felt thick again, but not empty. Across the street, the last of the cars disappeared. The big bay window went dark. I sank into the armchair by the fire, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders. The flames flickered low, throwing soft shadows on the walls. The phone buzzed again, a new message. I didn't check, but I could guess. Maybe apologies, maybe accusations. It didn't matter. For the first time in years, I felt a strange peace settling over me. Justice wasn't loud. It didn't roar or demand attention. It was this, quiet, inevitable, like snow covering everything evenly, leaving no trace of what had been buried beneath. I stared at the deed framed on the wall. The gold county seal gleamed faintly in the firelight. My husband's signature looked alive, steady, proud. I imagined him sitting beside me, nodding, his hand on mine. You did right, Eve. You didn't fight dirty. You just told the truth. The clock chimed midnight. Christmas Day had arrived. I whispered to the empty room, "Merry Christmas, Michael." Then I turned off the lights, letting the fire burn down to embers. The house was quiet again, but it didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt earned. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and endless. Inside, the last glow from the hearth reflected faintly off the envelope on the mantel, the one marked, "For later." Its shadow stretched long across the wall, a reminder that even silence has its own way of speaking. 5 days later, the snow had started to melt, leaving slush and puddles that reflected the dull gray sky. The holiday decorations in the neighborhood were beginning to look tired, deflated Santas slumped on lawns, lights half burned out, wreaths drooping with moisture. My house, on the other hand, looked almost the same as before Christmas. Quiet. Ordinary. The garland above the fireplace had gone dry and brittle, and I still hadn't taken down the small tree. It sat in the corner, lights unplugged, ornaments catching faint bits of morning light. The kettle whistled softly as I made tea. The smell of chamomile filled the air, familiar and calm. I'd stopped checking my phone as often. The flood of messages had slowed, though now and then another notification appeared, a stranger thanking me for my bravery, or someone sharing the post again with a comment like, "This woman taught her kids a lesson they'll never forget." I never replied. I hadn't written it to become anyone's symbol. I'd written it because silence, for too long, had been a form of surrender. That afternoon, I finally decided to do what I'd avoided all week, sort through the old boxes in the hall closet. Half of them were filled with things from when the kids still lived here, report cards, drawings, birthday cards, and the handprints they'd made in clay during grade school. I laid everything out on the floor, the papers soft and curling at the edges. I touched each piece gently, wondering if they'd ever remember the nights I stayed up finishing their costumes or the mornings I drove through storms to get them to practice on time. Love doesn't keep receipts, but somehow proof of it accumulates anyway. I was sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by those fragments of another life, when I heard it, the slow crunch of tires on the icy driveway. My heart gave one quiet thump. I stood and looked out the window. A white car had stopped in front of the house. The engine idled for a moment, then turned off. The driver's door opened. My daughter stepped out. She looked smaller than I remembered. Her hair was pulled into a messy bun, and she wasn't wearing the kind of clothes she used to flaunt on social media, no heels, no glittering coat. Just jeans, an oversized sweater, and a face that looked like it hadn't slept in days. She carried a small box wrapped in red paper. I didn't move right away. My hands stayed at my sides as she walked slowly up the path, her boots leaving uneven prints. At the door, she hesitated before knocking. The sound was faint, uncertain. I let her knock twice before I opened it. "Mom," she said, her voice breaking on the word. "Hi, sweetheart," I replied softly. She stood there in the doorway, snow melting on her shoulders. Her eyes glistened, and for a moment she looked like a little girl again, the same face that used to peek out from behind bedroom doors after a nightmare. "Can I come in?" she asked. I nodded, stepping aside. She wiped her boots on the mat, careful not to make a mess. The air between us was full of things unsaid. The first words came out like an exhale. "I'm sorry. I didn't answer right away. I wanted to hear more than that." She set the red box on the table and kept talking. "I messed up, Mom. I cared too much about how things looked. About what people thought. I just wanted everything to seem perfect." Her voice cracked again, and she pressed her hands to her face. "I didn't mean to erase you. I just didn't want anyone to see where you came from," I finished quietly. She nodded, shoulders shaking. "I thought it would make me look stronger. More independent. But it just made me a liar." I walked to the kettle, poured 2 cups of tea, and handed her one. She wrapped her fingers around the mug, still trembling. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sounds were the tick of the clock and the faint hiss of the heater. Finally, I said, "You didn't ruin my life, you know. You only forgot who built yours." She looked up, tears streaking her cheeks. "Everyone at the party saw your post. Dad's name. The deed. They knew I'd lied. His parents called off the engagement. I deserve it. I know I do." I sighed softly. "You don't deserve punishment. You deserve to understand what truth costs when you sell it cheap." She wiped her nose, nodding. "I do now." We sat together for a while, sipping tea. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore, it was healing, like soil after a storm. After a long pause, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded photograph. "I found this when I was packing his things," she said. "It's from that first Christmas here. You and Dad by the fireplace. I'd forgotten how happy we looked." I took the photo, my eyes blurring as I traced the edges. We were younger, full of plans. The kids sat between us, faces sticky from candy canes, the lights behind us glowing warm and soft. I felt my throat tighten. "He loved that Christmas," I whispered. "He said it was the first time the house felt like a home." She smiled faintly through her tears. "I think I finally understand what he meant." For a long while, we just sat there, the photo between us like a fragile truce. Then she gestured to the red box on the table. "That's for you." I unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a small, handmade ornament, wooden, shaped like a house, with a heart cut through the middle. On the back, she'd written, "Thank you for the home you built." My hands shook as I held it. "It's beautiful," I said. "It's not much," she whispered. "But it's honest." I hung the ornament on the tree, the one I hadn't bothered to light all week. Then I plugged the cord into the wall. The bulbs flickered once, then glowed steady, soft white, gentle on the eyes. The room filled with quiet light, reflecting off the framed deed above the mantel. We sat together on the couch, and she laid her head on my shoulder, something she hadn't done since she was a teenager. I could feel her breathing, slow and uneven. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," she said. "I already have," I said. "Forgiveness isn't a favor. It's a way to stop carrying what's too heavy." Her hand found mine, and for the first time in years, the silence between us felt peaceful. When evening came, I cooked us dinner, simple roast chicken and potatoes. We ate quietly, sharing small stories. She told me she planned to move back to a smaller place, maybe start fresh. I told her about Lorna's pie recipe, how she'd insisted I try it. The conversation wasn't grand, but it was real. Afterward, we washed dishes side by side, and I caught her humming under her breath, a tune from some old Christmas record we used to play when they were kids. I joined in softly. For a brief, perfect moment, it felt like the years had folded in on themselves and brought us back to the start. When she left later that night, she hugged me tight, longer than I expected. "I'll call tomorrow," she said. "I'll be here," I told her. After she drove away, I stood by the window watching her taillights fade into the misty snow. The neighborhood was quiet again. The stars were faint, but they were there. I turned back to the mantel. The deed hung framed and steady above the fire. Next to it, I placed the new ornament, the wooden house with the heart. The flames reflected in its tiny window, flickering like a heartbeat. On the table nearby sat the old envelope marked for later. I picked it up, opened it, and slipped the ornament's photo inside along with a note of my own. "Legacy isn't money or walls. It's truth remembered." I sealed it again and tucked it into the top drawer of the desk. Then I sat in the armchair, the fire warming my knees, and let my eyes close. The house creaked softly, but not in loneliness. It felt alive again, settled, whole. Somewhere outside, a wind chime stirred, its faint song drifting through the cold. It sounded like forgiveness, quiet, imperfect, but real. I thought of my husband, of his voice saying, "Never let them rewrite our story." I smiled. "Don't worry, Michael," I whispered. "They won't." The clock ticked toward midnight. The last ember in the fireplace glowed red, then dimmed to gold. I leaned back and let the warmth sink in, knowing that for the first time in years, the story of our family had come full circle. Not perfect, but honest. Not loud, but lasting. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft, clean, and new.